And are weight counts a valid tool to count paper documents?
Yes,
Okay, why is that?
scales are precise and you can determine the weight of a single sheet of paper, you can determine the weight of a single ballot, and then weigh it, and you're within, it's a pretty accurate measurement. That's what weight counting is.
Well, let me ask you this question. During the 2021 audit, did you and your crew weigh all of the ballots?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
I'll give them my relevance.
I give them some leeway. Go ahead. You can answer it, ma'am. Go ahead.
We didn't weigh all of them, no. We weighed some boxes.
Now, the boxes that you did weigh, was the weight count consistent with the other counts?
Yes,
How many counts did you do? Different counts?
I can't say, I mean,
Well, I think there was
half maybe?
the machine count, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't understand your question. Yes, there was a hand count, a weight count, a machine count, and in some cases an audit count. And then there was a count of ballot images as well.
Ballot images. Did you photograph each ballot?
Correct.
Did you count those? And were they all consistent with a weight count?
Yes.
And so if the United States Postal Service or some other large company wants to bill their client for 50,000 pieces of mail, it's an effective way to do so by measuring weight. Isn't that correct?
If it's the same piece of mail type.
And mail. All right. I have no further questions.
You'll excuse the witness.
I excuse the witness.
Done? Thank you.
No objection, Your Honor.
You're excused. Your next witness. I think we're okay. Your next witness would be.
Your Honor, our next witness is Bradley Bencourt, please.
Sir, if you could just stand right there in front of my clerk, she will swear you in. Thank you, sir. You'll make your way around to the witness stand and have a seat, please. Good. Who's going to do this examination? Whenever you're ready, Mr. Olson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Betancourt. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Bradley David Betancourt.
And what is your occupation?
Well, I generally work with real estate and have my own company and work with my dad.
Did you have occasion to be hired by Maricopa County for any elections?
Yes, I decided to work for T-Tech with them. They reached out, I applied, and they reached out after.
And when did they reach out to you?
A little over a month before the election,
And you're referring to the 2022 general election or the primary?
the general election.
Okay. And what is a T-Tech?
Well, we would set up the sites beforehand and site watch on the days of polling.
And in terms of setting up the sites beforehand, what kind of work were you doing?
Well, we focus mainly on the site books, the printers, and the MoFi, which is like a Wi-Fi.
Okay. And the site books are the the device that's used to check in a voter and have their ballot directed towards whatever precinct they're in.
Correct, yes.
And did you have did you participate in the election prior to election day in any kind of fashion?
I was working with them for about a month approximately. And we set up sites beforehand, some of the early polling sites, and we also site watched early. And we actually created a T-Tech group, a text group, to stay in touch while we were site watching.
How was that group set up? Was it through your supervisor or,
Yeah, it was through the supervisor.
and who was that?
That was Jose
Do you have a last name?
Luis Arbayo.
And is he an employee of Maricopa County?
He's a permanent employee, yes.
And what is his function at Maricopa County?
Well, he was basically our supervisor for the T-Techs. He had been a T-Tech previously as a temporary employee, and he wound up getting a permanent position.
And how many T-Techs were in this group that he set up?
Well, there was him as the supervisor and then 15 T-Techs.
And approximately how many vote centers would be covered by these 15 T-Techs, of which I assume you were one of them?
Correct. Yes, I was a T-Tech. So on election day, if that's what you're referring to, we all started out at one location. Some of us stayed at that location the whole day, and other ones moved around to multiple locations. If you actually look in one of the exhibits on the text messages, one person had well over 100 miles driving around to probably about 5 or 6 sites throughout the day.
Do you have an estimate as to how many vote centers were covered by the 15 T-Techs, approximately?
I would say a minimum of 20 to 30. That's a bare minimum.
And at this point, I would like to bring up Exhibit 58, Your Honor. Go to the next page. And Exhibit 58 is a series of about over 54 pages of text messages. Do you recognize this document, sir?
Absolutely, yes.
And what is it?
It's the group text from that day, the election day.
And is this a group text chats from your phone?
Yes, yes, sir.
And did you provide a declaration in this case?
Yes,
And you swore under oath under the penalty of perjury to tell the truth, correct?
absolutely correct.
And did you, in connection with this declaration, provide screenshots of your text messages with the other T-Techs, the other 15 T-Techs that day?
Yes, correct.
Do you believe this to be, and you can scroll through some, and does this appear to be a true and accurate copy of your text messages?
Yes, sir, it does. There are a lot of issues that came up throughout the day. And including at times T-Techs would say the ballots look pristine, but the tabulators aren't reading them. So that would really not have to do with the printers from our point of view. And that wasn't just one person, there were others that said similar things.
Do these text messages represent communications that were happening as they were occurring on election day?
Yes, yes, in real time, absolutely.
Your Honor, at this point, we'd like to move for Exhibit 58 to be entered into the record as evidence. It is hearsay, however, under present impression and excited utterance. As you will see, some of them, for example, if we could go to page base number 367. And at the bottom, you'll see, Your Honor, it says, "I'm having a 911." I would say that there are a number of, as you just can scroll through, these would classify or qualify as either excited utterance or present sense impression certainly, so we would move to have them admitted into the record under those exceptions, Your Honor.
Any objections?
Your Honor, Christina Ford on behalf of the governor-elect. We do object to these coming in. There are more than, I believe, 50 pages of these texts, and one text out of 50 pages that potentially qualifies for an excited utterance doesn't make up for 50 pages of text from this day of otherwise out-of-court statements that they're trying to enter for the truth of the matter.
Your Honor,
Go ahead.
I also submitted them, sir, with the under the present sense impression. These are real-time messages, text messages that are being typed in as the events are unfolding, the day of election, and I believe it falls under that exception as well.
Okay. I'm going to allow them because I think that what they represent is the correspondence back and forth between the techs who are working with their immediate impressions of trying to resolve the problem. So go ahead. So what you're offering, what's the number again?
It's 58, Your Honor.
Okay, so I'll admit 58 over objection. Go ahead.
Mr. Betancourt, can you describe what was going on between you and your other T-techs on election day? If you had to characterize it.
Yeah, we were consistently talking back and forth, trying to solve the problems. And this group was really trying hard because there were a lot of issues that popped up. And actually our main fix turned out to be you walk up to the printer, open up the printer, take out the ink cartridge and shake it. So that was our main fix. That was the big one we were intending to do. I know the official county statement was that they changed the printer settings, but I'd say based on the text I saw, that was probably about 10 to 20% of the issue there. So I would say that'd be an incomplete description of the issues from my point of view, seeing the text.
Did the situation resolve very quickly, or did it last throughout the day with the problems?
That depended on the location. Some got better and some kept having issues. I mean, we had issues. I believe there was one even after closing time where they were asking someone to go over to Biltmore, I believe it is. You can confirm towards the end there.
How would you care? How old are you, sir?
I'm 34 years old.
And how long have you been in Arizona?
Well, I've been off and on. I've actually lived in 5 states, but overall, a little over a decade in Arizona.
And so you've been voting for how long?
Well, I've been voting for 16 years, and in some different states, but mostly in Arizona during that time.
How would you characterize the events on election day that you observed personally and also communicated with the fellow T-techs that were servicing between 20 and 30 vote centers compared to elections, even that you just participated in as a voter?
It felt a bit chaotic. I had people from the other places I've lived reaching out and saying, what's going on in Maricopa County down there? So it felt a little chaotic, I would say.
Were these problems that continued throughout the day at many of these vote centers?
Yeah, and like I said, we tried to shake the ink cartridge. They cleaned the corona wire. They would have the inspector call over a troubleshooter to try to clean the tabulator because, like I said, sometimes in there the prints looked good, but the tabulator wasn't taking them anyway.
Did you hear of any long lines outside of the vote centers?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of long lines, and in there it actually describes. There's at least one in there that it describes, and I know of other locations where they completely wound up shutting down for a certain amount of time, and they were basically sending people to other locations.
How upset were voters that you interacted with or heard about?
Well, I heard some people being very upset, more so at other locations. We didn't have quite as many issues at our location, but it did shut down for about 5 to 10 minutes at one point with both tabulators being down. And that actually happened because one lady had put in a ballot and I was standing there when I saw this. The tabulator took it through. It didn't reject it. It took it through, but it didn't have the green check mark or say that it had been successfully cast. So I hadn't seen that on anything else. So we called the inspector over, and she called the hotline, and they said she should open up the blue bin where the tabulator is, pull out the ballots. They were going to count those downtown and then restart basically from zero, restart counting the ballots that go into that tabulator from that point on.
Did the problems with the tabulators, did they, in your opinion, create the long lines and that you heard about from different T-Techs?
I would say it made it worse because we had lines to begin the day. And once those tabulator issues started happening, the lines just backed up more.
And were there lines outside of the voting center?
Oh yeah, I mean, at our place, there was a line outside the door all day, and we had less problems than a lot of other places.
And do you understand the check-in process?
That's more the polling worker side of it, the site book area. That's more the poll worker is responsible for that. I wasn't responsible for that part of it.
Did you hear about long lines extending past 8 o'clock at night?
Yes, it's in the texts. I know at least one or two places, and then I know someone who wasn't in this group because this was the East Valley group, and there was a West Valley group as well. So I know someone in the West Valley. He didn't get home. Like I left my site at about 10, and we had a short line, at the end of the night. Probably wrapped up about 8 p.m. And then this other guy from the West group had left about 10:30, 10:45. And I know there was at least one or two people in this group that left later than me.
Do you know whether or not any people who were waiting in line just simply gave up waiting in line or saw things on the news and decided that they just didn't have the time to come out and vote?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation, foundation.
You can answer it yes or no. He was asked, do you know? Sir, if you're able to answer yes or no.
Yes, I don't know that personally. As I said, my site had less problems than the others, so I can only speak for my site, and I don't have any knowledge of that specific.
Thank you, Mr. Betancourt.
Cross-examine.
Good afternoon, Mr. Betancourt. I understand from your testimony and from your declaration in this case that you helped set up equipment in preparation for Election Day.
Correct.
You didn't intentionally cause the tabulators to reject ballots, correct?
No, actually, we weren't even specifically focused on the tabulators with our position.
And you don't know of any other T-Techs who intentionally caused the issue?
They were temporary employees, so I don't know of any T-Techs that caused that issue.
And you said here today that you were hired along with your other T-Techs to help resolve problems that were occurring at polling locations, correct?
Yes, that was part of it, the setting up of sites along with resolving problems when they arose.
And then you were in fact deployed to help resolve these issues when they did spike up, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that sometimes tabulators cannot read a ballot due to the way that the voter marks the ballot?
Yes, and I actually wrote that in my declaration as well. That's part of it, but that wasn't the whole part, so I can specify. That was definitely not the whole part. There were some that looked very good, and the voters had marked them very well, and they weren't being read.
Okay, well, I wanted to go through some of those. So I understand from your declaration that you and your fellow T-Techs sometimes found that cleaning the corona wire and the printer would sometimes help fix the tabulator issue. Is that correct?
Yes, and the corona wire, that was on the older printers. I actually had the newer Lexmarks at the location I was at. So that wasn't part of the location I was at.
Okay. And the group also found that changing the toner or shaking the toner could sometimes make improvements to the tabulators.
Yeah, shaking the toner actually worked a decent amount. It wasn't perfect, but it helped at times.
Okay. And then you all also found that letting the printer warm up could also improve the situation.
We'd have to go back through the text and confirm that. I don't recall that specifically, but there were a lot of texts in there, so I don't recall every text that we had.
You have no personal knowledge as to whether the printing and tabulator errors changed the outcome of the collection. The outcome of the election, correct?
I don't see how there's any way I could prove that one way or the other.
But you have no personal knowledge.
I believe I just said I can't prove anything one way or another by myself.
Okay. So you similarly do not have any personal knowledge of whether the printing errors were the result of an intentional scheme to undermine the election?
Well, I was just a temporary employee doing what I was employed to do.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Nothing further? Can we excuse witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
You're free to go. Mr. Payne. Next witness.
Your Honor, we next call Mark Sonnenklar.
Some Clark, if you could just come over in front of the clerk. If you could just raise the up and see what the status is. Go ahead, Mr. Olson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sonnenklar.
Good afternoon.
Would you please state your full name for the record?
Mark Sonnenklar, S as in Sam, Onnenklar.
And what is your occupation, sir?
I'm a lawyer,
And how long have you been a lawyer?
26, almost 27 years.
Did you have an opportunity to, well, strike that. How long have you lived in Arizona?
Moved back to Arizona about 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago. I was here from age 9 through 21. So I don't know, what, 13 years total?
Did you have an opportunity to participate in the 2022 election cycle?
I did.
And in what capacity did you participate in that cycle?
I was a roving attorney in the Republican National Committee's election integrity program for the primary and the general election.
And what does a roving attorney do?
A roving attorney goes to the vote centers and just observes what is happening at the vote centers to determine if, things are going well or not, whether things are working in accordance with law.
And when did you first act as a roving attorney?
During the primary on August 2nd, 2022.
And can you describe what you did as a roving attorney during the primary?
The process that I used, which we were trained to use for both the primary and the general election, was to go to the vote center, talk to the inspector, go directly to the inspector of that vote center.
Who is an inspector?
The inspector is the lead person, the lead poll worker at a vote center.
Are they
So
employed by Maricopa County?
yes, I believe they are paid by Maricopa County.
Is that a temporary position or are they a full-time employee of Maricopa?
They're temporary.
Okay.
So I would go to the vote center. I would ask for the inspector. I would ask the inspector if there was a Republican observer inside the vote center, because there's not, by law, we're not allowed to have more than 2 observers from any one party within the vote center. I would ask to speak with the Republican observer if there was one outside. I would ask that Republican observer how things were going, what he or she was seeing inside the vote center. I would take notes on what the observer, the Republican observer, told me. I would then ask the Republican observer to remain outside, and then I would go back into the vote center and speak with the inspector and ask really the same questions that I had asked the Republican observer. How are things going? If there were issues, I would ask more questions about those issues. And I was trying to determine whether, what the Republican observer was telling me was matching up with what the inspector was telling me. And I took notes while I was talking with the inspectors as well.
Did you create a report in connection after the election associated with that? And I'm talking about the primary.
I did. I had a sense that there was going to be litigation, and I knew that I had information that would be critical to that litigation. And so I reached out to, there were 17 or 18, I'm not clear exactly, but I believe there were 17 roving attorneys in the program with the RNC. And I reached out to all of them and asked them what their experience was. And they reported to me, and I created a report based on my own personal experience at 10 vote centers during the general election, and 105 other vote centers that the roving attorneys who responded to me, which I believe were 10, I believe, responded to me and were willing to, tell me what had occurred, what they had seen. So the 11 of us put together observed at 115 vote centers.
How many vote centers did you personally visit?
10,
10. And this is during the general election, correct?
yes.
And what was your experience and what you personally saw at those 10 vote centers?
Well, it was really pandemonium out there, everywhere. I was within, from Fountain Hills to North Scottsdale, or where my vote centers were. I started out in Fountain Hills, and immediately, there was a line of 150 people at Fountain Hills. The tabulators were not working. And that was what I saw I saw the same thing happening at 6 of my 10 vote centers. There were different things happening at some of the other ones too, but 6 of them in particular were really bad.
And so you've been voting for a number of years, correct?
Yeah.
How would you characterize the events of the 2022 general election compared to other elections that you witnessed?
Oh, this was a completely different animal here. So I was a roving attorney during the primary, and there were, some minimal problems there too. But the general election was a completely different situation. There were lines out the door, which you did not see during the primary at many of the vote centers. There were angry and frustrated voters who did not want to put their ballots into box 3. And there, it was just, and then there were the poll workers who were extremely frustrated and really didn't know what to do. Most of them, I would say, were doing their best, to figure out a solution to the fact that the tabulators were down, were not reading the ballots. Everyone was just freaked out.
A question for you. There's been some testimony earlier about wait times. Do you have an understanding of how the county measures wait times?
Yes, I understand that one of the poll workers is supposed to check the line every 15 minutes and report back to MCTEC, is my understanding. It would have been difficult. I don't know where you're going with the question, but it would have been very difficult for the poll workers who were crazed trying to figure out just how to get the tabulators to read the ballots. I can't imagine that there was time for any poll workers at the worst vote centers anyway to actually go out and check the line.
I believe you mentioned that you visited personally about 10 vote centers,
Yes,
and that the other roving attorneys that you were working with, it was a total of about 115 vote centers in total.
yes,
And that's 115 out of about, I think, 223 vote centers, correct?
that's correct.
So that's a little over half of the vote centers.
I believe it was 52%.
How are you able to characterize what your the other roving attorneys were experiencing, whether it was similar to what you were experiencing or worse or maybe not as bad? How would you characterize?
Well, I would say that most of the roving attorneys had a similar experience to mine. I can't think of one that had a different experience. There may be, but for the most part, aggregated together, pretty much everyone had the same experience.
And if somebody were to characterize the events of that day as minor technical difficulties that should be expected in any election, what would you say to that?
I would say that's nonsense. When you have 132, we've been able to document that there were at least 132 vote centers with tabulator problems out of 227, which comes out to about 59%. I don't see how that could be characterized as a small matter.
You mentioned you created a report along with the other roving attorneys that you worked with. Did you disseminate that report to anybody?
I did send that report out. Yes, I did.
Do you believe that report is accurate in its recitation of the events of Election Day?
Absolutely. I was very careful not to exaggerate, overstate. I was careful to be factual.
And is that report based on sworn your conversations plus sworn declarations from the other roving attorneys that were given to you?
Yes, it is.
And if you would call up Exhibit 52.
That's wrong. Wrong PC.
What's going on?
Pulled up the wrong system.
Is there a problem?
I'm being told that the person over here needs to do it. It's up on our screen here, Your Honor.
It's the podium actually, is what you want to bring up. There you go.
Can you go to the top? And Mr. Soniclair, is this a
For Maricopa County, I would object to this document to the extent that it's duplicative of this witness's testimony just provided in this court, and to the extent that it is intended to be admitted for the truth of the matter asserted for persons he's talked to, it would be hearsay.
Your Honor, we have submitted this report under Rule 807. It is one of the documents that we gave notice to. And I would say that Your Honor can judge the value of the weight, but given, as the witness has testified to, we're talking about 105 vote centers. And so that he and his other fellow roving attorneys gave sworn testimony about the occurrences there. I think it should go to the weight, Your Honor. I think it would be probative, and given the limited time we have to talk about 105 vote centers, that we respectfully request Your Honor to admit it.
He's here to testify about what he saw, he observed. So it's cumulative as to that. I think this morning I told you that I was willing to admit under 807 the attached statements of the other roving attorneys. So you can choose. You can choose to either have those affidavits admitted under 807, or you can forego that and ask him questions about it and go with his report. But I'm not going to do both.
Your Honor, just point of clarification.
That's a threefer. That's him testifying, his report, and the affidavits that he's referring to in his testimony and his report. So I don't know if you understood this morning that I was willing to admit the affidavits attached to Mr. Santaclair's affidavit under 807, provided that you could, because I've read them.
Yes, Your Honor.
And I believe that under 807, the same analysis applies to what I told you this morning, that they appear to also be very factual as opposed to advocacy, even though I believe that he's just said all of this was prepared in anticipation of litigation, but the affidavits are sworn to and contain facts rather than advocacy or opinions. So after all my speaking, your choice how you wish to proceed, Mr. Olson, but I'm not going to do both. I'm not going to put in all those affidavits and have him talk about everything in his report and all the hearsay.
I think I know where I'm going, sir. We will forego. We will keep them into evidence, as Your Honor alluded to, and we will move on to another topic.
Okay, very good, sir.
Can you pull up? Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to open up Exhibit 91. Mr. Santaclair, up on the screen is what has been marked for identification as Exhibit 91. It is an exhibit that was part of a response letter by Maricopa County to the AG's letter dated November 19th, questioning some of the events around Election Day. Have you ever seen this document before?
Yes, I've read it multiple times.
And do you recognize this as a document that was produced by Maricopa County?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to doubt that it's a true and accurate copy?
No.
Your Honor, at this time, we would move to admit Exhibit 91 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
91 is admitted. I think it's a self-authenticating document.
Making sure. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Sonnenclair, do you see where it states on the first page of this document, in the paragraph beginning, while a few, you see that? While a few 2022 general election locations encountered 80 to 115-minute wait times on Election Day, Maricopa County posted these wait times on our website, informing voters of other nearby options that had shorter times.
Yes, I see it.
Do you have an understanding, based on your work, whether or not that's an accurate statement?
That's not an accurate statement.
And why do you say that?
There were many more vote centers. I mean, I must have had, I believe I had two, at least just in my 10, that had longer wait times than 80 minutes. And they're not included in the list in footnote 1.
And you're talking about footnote 1 on the page that's Bates stamped, last 3 digits, 715, the first page of this document.
And in addition to that, we documented through declarations that there were many, many other vote centers that had over 80-minute wait times.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not the county has been trying to understate the extent of the problems at the vote centers that arose on Election Day?
Yes,
Your Honor, object to foundation and speculation.
All right. As to foundation, I'd overrule it. So if you're able to answer it, and I assume you're asking him based on his personal knowledge.
Yes, John.
If you're able to answer it, Mr. Sonnenclair.
thank you. Well, I mean, I was the one who oversaw the putting together of the issues spreadsheet, which showed how many vote centers had tabulator problems, how many vote centers had long lines. I've also read this Board of Supervisors report multiple times, and there are many, many mischaracterizations and flat out falsehoods in this. Now, so yes, I believe that they have not presented the truth here in this document.
We have nothing further at this time, sir.
Cross-exam, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sonnenclair. I'm here on behalf of the governor-elect. Your declaration gives some figures about how many vote centers were affected with tabulator issues and lines. And these figures were gathered from reports of yourself, other RNC roving attorneys, and Republican observers, correct?
That's correct.
Your declaration in this case concludes that 64 of 223 vote centers had long lines on Election Day, correct?
That's correct.
So you concluded that more than 70% of vote centers on election day did not have long lines?
You could infer that. But actually, what I would say about that is that we had time constraints in putting together our issues spreadsheet. And so I firmly believe that had we had additional time, basically, we had to put it together in 2 weeks. So we had to gather declarations from a lot of people in order to prove what we wanted to prove, in order for the evidence to show 64, we showed on the issues spreadsheet that 64